Hey, Gleb here. In this video I'll show you how to put together a multi-layer Starfield that has some cool depth and dimension with the help of Dust Particles Plus, the ready-made asset powered by geometry nodes. It has a free version and can be downloaded from Blender Market and Gumroad. First of all, after downloading DP from Blender Market or Gumroad, the easiest way to import it into your scene is to open the Dust Particles Free or Pro blend file, and here I'm in the rendered mode, by the way. If we hit play, we'll notice chaotic motion, not very characteristic to the star systems, but it depends on the star system, I guess. So we need to select the dust object and right-click to copy objects, or just hit Ctrl+C. Then just go into your scene, and I usually try to keep things organized by creating a collection for everything. So this one will be the stars, and this one is scene, and then right-click and choose paste. It should get the DP plus particles imported, but also this camera, which I don't think we need, so we can get rid of it. On clicking the DP plus object, and obviously after giving it a cool name first, so on clicking it and traveling to the modifiers tab, we'll see all the settings to change the look and feel of our particles. But first, let's remove the pre-assigned camera and point it to this one instead, to make sure that the particle sprites are facing the correct camera, that is. Now I'll split the window in two, and the bottom one will be our rendered view. It is important to set the rendered view going. Now zero on the numpad to plunge into the camera view, and to see it clearer, I'll hide the user interface. And actually, why don't we turn off the ambient lights, so it's like the cosmic void? Dust Particles has a lot of really useful knobs and sliders to help us tailor the look, so let's have a look at them. Right now the cube is 2 meters wide, and to make it fill the camera border in a better way, we can just scale it up to around maybe 5 meters. I'll go ahead and apply the scale to bake it in. With the default settings, it won't look like anything has changed, but there is this setting called Scale with Bounding Box, and if it's turned off, the particle scaling becomes absolute, and then applying the scale would have an effect. I prefer to keep it relative though. I want to achieve the continuous look for our starscape, so I'll dolly the camera a bit closer. Alternatively, we can nudge the focal length to zoom in, but that would have a bit different effect as for the perspective. To set up the orbiting motion, I'll add the empty object. Scale the object down so it isn't as menacing, I guess. I'll call it camera_aim, and we'll select the camera, then shift-click on this empty, and then parent it. I mean parent the camera to the empty. So when the empty is rotated or whatever, the camera would follow. The idea is to put together the rotating animation really quickly. Whoops, I forgot that our particles are still getting playful once the play button is hit, like tiny fireflies, so cute. What we can do to stop this unsanctioned activism is come down to the modifier settings, scroll down to the random movement section and zero out the speed. That should teach them a lesson. Well, thinking of it, I can imagine that some space animations may actually use some motion, maybe not as chaotic, but something with lower uniqueness perhaps, something that the poetic types call the silent dance of the constellations in tune. You got the point. For that type of star animations, I wouldn't rule out some simple motion completely. I would just keep it slightly more orderly. Anyway, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'll just make it completely static. Now back to animating the camera. In Blender 4.1, the way the keyframing works is that we pick the keying set from here. What do we want to animate, in other words, like rotation, to not just animate everything, although that would work too in this case. And then simply right-click and insert keyframe. And we should notice the rotation field highlighted in yellow, and the new keyframe has appeared on the timeline. Then scrolling to the last one, which is 250 or whatever, I'll press R twice to set the trackball rotation mode going, and then give our camera rig a spin. And then the I shortcut is a faster way to insert a keyframe. So yeah, our camera should now rotate around this cloud in this multi-axis way. Actually, feel free to play with it to create any sort of animation that you wish. I'll also select all keyframes and change their interpolation mode to linear, so it doesn't speed up and slow down. And I think, to make it more dramatic or simply faster, I'll move the last keyframe to the frame number 140 or something. Yep, that looks good. Every starscape needs a bit of post-processing to really shine, no pun intended. I usually limit the contents outside the camera frame via passepartout control to focus the actual shot like that. Okay, here I'm using the Legacy Eevee version, but it'll be the same in Eevee Next, or in Cycles for that matter. It doesn't matter at all what render engine you choose for the purposes of this tutorial. For a more heightened perspective, feel free to widen the field of view and fly the camera closer, if that's something that looks better to you. That will create a totally different relationship between the close and the far points, a bit enhanced sense of movement too, probably. I will Control Z it to 50mm though, just something I wanted to mention really quickly. I usually disable viewport denoising for a clean view on the animation without this temporal smudging. It is especially useful if there is some shimmering in the particles. Then we can open the Compositor panel, click the Use Nodes, super important button, and yeah, adding glare is a no-brainer. I'll be repeating myself, but the post-pro is really important when working with stars, so bear with me. Let's turn on the viewport preview so we make the compositor effects real-time. So, to really sell the effect of anything really bright and shiny, we pretty much need to refer to some form of simulating an overflow of charge or of light in the photodiodes of digital cameras, so this charge splits onto the adjacent pixels, creating a glow. Using the glare node is probably the most straightforward way to do it. It is an awesome little effect that tells us what is really bright on screen. Ultimately, all these artifacts are influenced by the emission strength or emit strength parameter in DP+, so it's worth tweaking it back and forth to nail the right power. I usually aim to keep just a few stars really shiny while the rest is pretty chill as far as the effects go. Then the value variation also affects the overall brightness when it comes to high dynamic range, so definitely worth experimenting with. I want the glare to affect a rather small percentage of stars, so I will play with the threshold. And then I will lower the fade to make it slightly less bold. I think it's pretty nice, not too overwhelming. To add some nuance to it, it's usually worth layering a few glow layers, the streaking and the fog glow, for example, to simulate different types of artifacts, the sensor saturation, the optical flares, so on and so forth, all to make it look more rich and more interesting ultimately. Like the third type of glow can be this otherworldly dreamy glow of large radius, which, as we've already covered in the other videos, can be easily achieved by applying some blur to the image and adding this to our render via the mix node set to add. I'll make the light diffusion pretty spread out and will tone down its influence a bit. I usually think of it as some form of light scattering, like the distant light of these stars is getting to us through some space dust and fog, that sort of thing. Now let me show you a pretty cool feature of DP+ that also interacts with the glow, which is shimmer. Once again, a quick reminder that it is important to disable the viewport denoising to get a truthful preview of what the dynamic effects like shimmer actually look like. So by adjusting the strength and other properties within the shimmer panel, we can easily control the twinkling or flickering of our particles. It is really fun to use, I should tell you. The speed should be kept at bay, I think. Otherwise it will look like confetti. Anyway, adding a little shimmer is always a win. Now let's explore the rest of the dust particle settings really quickly to see what else could be worth tweaking. The amount is fine. Then, if some particular star is in the wrong spot, like lingering just in front of our camera, the seed change can help to push it away. Then the max size can be lowered, as it's slightly too bold right now. It can very well be lower, so to get a better sense of galactic scale. It's also quite healthy to have some gradient of scale. That is controlled by the minimum size slider. What else? We don't need the spherical fade here. But if that was something else, like a wormhole or a snow globe, that would come in handy. A nice little feature. I think we'll make a video about it pretty soon. But for now, I'll turn it off. The border feathering affects how diffuse the particle sprites are, which may affect the amount of glare too. Basically, I think it's worth keeping it pretty diffuse, as it helps to imitate some extra haziness. Then the color. I think it can be made super saturated, simply because the saturation variation control is rather a desaturation variation, as it mostly reduces the colorfulness. So yeah, it's best to go super saturated and then adjust the variation, but not too much. The hue variation is pretty self-explanatory. It just shifts the hue in both the clockwise and counterclockwise directions on the color wheel. Okay, we've already covered the value variation, I think. So let's actually hit play. I do it via the Shift Space shortcut, but for you it's probably just spacebar. Very nice. Somehow I don't see enough glare after the tweaks. Maybe it's worth cranking it up, but not too far. It's the shimmer that takes it away a bit, I suppose. Yeah, just this little extra hotness. Maybe the amount of glare over here can be increased too. The mysterious orbs burning like embers. Then again, there are the random movement controls, which in my opinion are the best part of the plugin, by far, but not so much in this particular case. I'm just seizing the opportunity to bring it up again. The starscape should be rendered in layers, so it's time to get the first one out. One major effect that we haven't used just yet is motion blur, especially given that we have a nice rotating motion going. It'll be just a killer. I'm going to render some random static frame without it first, to kind of debug it, and then switch to a different render slot, apply the motion blur, and bring the steps up to 4 or something. The shutter is set to half a frame, by the way, so I'll render it again. The shutter of 0.5 is already enough to see some stretching caused by particles movement, or rather the camera movement. It's all relative, of course. If the shutter would be higher, the stretching would become more pronounced, obviously. And I think this is it for the post-pro. We are good to go and render this first layer of our animation out. Maybe as the finishing touch, I'll still use a tiny bit of chromatic aberration though, aka lens distortion. I usually use this effect in the projector mode to tame its intensity. It doesn't have to be overly dramatic. Okay, the last minute check of the render settings. We have 24 frames per second in some resolution that we've set. The start and end frames check. As for the output format, that should be OpenEXR if we're gonna composite it with other layers, so an intermediate format in other words. I'll leave the compression at zip, then define the output folder, star01, and I think we're all set. Render animation. So basically that's how this effect can be done and how it can be recreated. That being said, it looks best and just more pleasing to the eye when there are multiple layers of stars with slightly different settings. That gives it depth. Let me show you really quickly how something like that can be done. Instead of tweaking the star settings and rendering again, let me show you something else. And that is the Pro version of the Dust Particles Plus, taking the product placement up a notch, you see? Something we've added in the latest update to Dust Particles Pro, which unlike the free version, isn't free. So one of the pretty exciting features that we added is the Stars and Galaxies materials and sprites, some of them animated. Even though the default circle sprites are completely fine for rendering stars, these could add a little bit of extra coolness to your space renders. Like the flare is just this tiny animated lens flare. Actually, let me just activate the flare collection with all the settings preset. Oh, and it's still moving. Help? Where is it? Speed 0. Yeah, so this one could be useful for rendering Starfields too, if extra twinkling is needed. Then there are more presets like these stars of different kinds. This one is pretty interesting, the simple swirling galaxies. Or there's a slightly more stylized Galaxies_B. Actually, let's remove the background fill. Okay, these are the sprites designed with a wide dynamic range in mind, with the hot pixels here and there simulating the extreme emission of the celestial objects. Then there are a few varieties of the star sprites. These should look pretty neat when used in tandem with some other stuff to add that Hubble telescope look to your renders. So here I fast-tracked the process to show you the collection of different space sprites and how it would look. Yeah, so this is how the Pro version can be used to mock it up really quickly and make it look like a NASA telescope image or something. It should also interact with the glare beautifully. And then it's done and we are laughing. And rendering out that second layer of stars using the EXR format. From here, it is up to you how many layers do you want to render. I think the more the merrier. For example, just an idea, you can make a very dense particle system with DP plus Free or Pro. It will run slow and look really boring on its own, but there is a trick to make it less sleep-inducing. And that is some noise-based absorption. Basically a 3D noise plugged into the absorption shader. As a quick reminder, we've covered it in the previous videos of the course. Let me make the background brighter to reveal this monster devouring the stars and galaxies. Basically, it is a volumetric absorption, nothing more. Then the stars won't be as uniformly distributed as before, and it will look pretty cool in motion too. So that is a cool idea that could be worth trying for one of the layers. And here is another thing that isn't necessary, but yeah, just wanted to show you something. So once we get to compositing these layers, some sort of a nebula layer would be awesome to have to overlay on top of everything else eventually. It can be rendered in either Eevee or cycles, just this random nebula object like this one that has been covered in the simple nebula or advanced nebula chapters. It doesn't have to be complicated, just an extra something rendered in that scene to get the camera motion right. Really, the more such layers, the better, usually. What I want to do next is show how these XR image sequences can be mixed or composited together in Blender. Here we have the sequencer and the preview open. There's a bunch of channels. I have constrained the animation range to 120 frames, even though we rendered 140, whatever, that doesn't matter. Now I'll move the playhead to frame number 1, so the sequence starts at that frame once we import it. The resolution is 1080p, a regular high-definition video. Now I'll go add and get the first sequence imported. I ended up rendering 6 layers, So this is the first one. A to select all of them and import. We can move it around if needed. It should play pretty fast in real time, in fact, but if that's not the case, it will get cached by Blender eventually, so after a few playthroughs, it will be fast and furious. Now, all the layers can be added one by one. The process is the same, so I'll just go through some of them really quickly. Here's the second layer with the Galaxies from DP plus Pro. A quick tip. Strips can be muted or hidden from the right-click menu, or better yet, with the H shortcut, or Alt-H to show it. As we can see, currently this clip occludes what's beneath it. To overlay it on top of the first one, the blending mode has to be set to add instead, in the right sidebar. Here we have the opacity slider to change the amount. Then it's just a matter of repeating the same workflow for all the new strips. Get a new one, add it on top of everything else. See how rich and deep it becomes when a bunch of such star layers are blended and each one being a little different, combining into a celestial symphony. Let me fast forward through the process though. The last one is actually the Nebula footage, which can also be blended in with the rest using the add mode. That is perfectly fine, but this time I'll try something different to shake things up, and we'll use the cross-blending mode and just bring its opacity down, so it becomes kind of this thin veil of interstellar medium. I think it will help to glue everything together visually, our star's composition. By now, replaying the composition should become a pretty slow process until everything is cached, so that's something to keep in mind. And of course, it is up to you to decide in what proportion to mix these layers, of course. That's a big part of the fun, and a big part of the look. Finally, it could be worth throwing in some color grading into the mix, to tie it together even more. It can be done by adding the adjustment layer on top of everything else, then coming over to the modifiers and selecting the color balance. The mode should be offset power slope, as it's the only mode that works correctly. Then we can just give it some color treatment. We won't go into the weeds right now, but we can cool down the highlights, for example, or do whatever we want in terms of creating a certain look out of what we've got here. We can also make the whole thing brighter as well, but be careful as it will emphasize the noise or any flickering issues. Sometimes the darker tones can be lifted a bit to help reveal the details. In cinematography they do it quite often anyway. It's usually a good thing to leave some breathing room for darker tones and not crunch it too much. Double so when it comes to already very dark matter like space art. On trying to play it back, we can tell that it is slow. Well, before Blender caches it, anyway. And as we are using the unbounded EXR sources, it means that we can choose any view transform as well, be it Filmic or AGX or whatever, and we can adjust the exposure for that matter. As we know, the view transform within the color management tab is applied as the last processing effect in the processing chain, after everything else has been applied. That's the architecture of how Blender rendering works. Finally, if you want to export this compositing result, then after checking the settings, of course, we can go MPEG video as the file format, for example, or something like PNG or TIFF sequences if you need image sequences for some external video editing. But if you just want to export the video out, then you can go MPEG 4. So it's viewable on social media and stuff like that. Then just define the output folder and give it a render. Render it out, my friend. So this is how the process of creating fantastic multi-layered starscapes looks with Dust Particles Plus. A lot can be done with the free version, and if you want that extra spice or the Galaxy sprites and some other cool features, and soon even more stuff will be added, then we would appreciate if you check the Pro version. I hope you found this video interesting. My name is Gleb Alexandrov, and you're watching the Stars update from the Nebula course for Blender, the ultimate guide to creating 3D nebulae in your favorite open source software. Take care, and I will see you next time.